Hello and welcome, or welcome back to my channel. This is Karmic Fixer Tarot with Janai, and we are not on the green screen. We're right under the fan, and still a heat wave going on. And yeah, so we are getting back into our Jungian deck study with the Hierophant this week. Let's take a moment to drink him in. We have the Hierophant. If you're familiar at all with the Rider-Waite-Smith-Coleman, you might already notice some differences. And yes, of course, we have our materials, our complimentary books by Robert Wang, the creator of the Jungian Deck, Tarot Psychology, and we have the Jungian Tarot and its archetypes. And they're very informative on some of the history behind each card and also some of the inspiration for Robert Wang's paintings, Robert Wang's artwork for each of the cards. So, take a moment to gather myself. And we are, again, working with the Hierophant. And the Hierophant represents religious orthodoxy, represents knowledge, the gateway between mankind and the divine. Think of him in a sort of priestly position, the emissary between earth and heaven. And you might already notice some differences between the Rider-Waite-Smith-Coleman or other Hierophant decks and this particular deck. So what I like to do is I set a timer for 5 minutes in my practice. If you're familiar at all with these videos, if you've been watching for the past few weeks, thank you so much for that, by the way. And I like to start by giving myself 5 minutes to just kind of take in the images of the Hierophant. Now, if we're looking at this particular Hierophant, some of the differences, of course, that might stick out is this Hierophant is in the out of doors. He's got sunshine, a beautiful day behind him, a nice big cloud. And it took me a few moments to hone in on the sun just kind of peeking out from behind the Hierophant's throne, which I thought was interesting. The sun isn't peeking out from behind the clouds so much as the throne. So that might be something to meditate on if we're looking at this card. I think the sun perhaps represents kind of the creator, just sort of the greater energy, the sort of universal creator energy, which I think is interesting. If we look at this particular Hierophant, some of the lore or some of the mythological history behind this card is the Hierophant as sort of a demiurge or a sort of lesser god. In fact, in this particular deck, so we've been dealing with the major arcana as a sort of archetypal, archetypal family. As we've been going through the major arcana cards, one thing I do want to point out is that in this study, based on the Tarot Psychology book, there's a program in the back of that book that I'm following as far as this particular deck study. We're examining each of the major arcana cards as part of an archetypal family based on that program. So the first week, we studied the Emperor as the archetypal father. We studied the Empress as the archetypal mother. Actually, I think the Empress, if I remember correctly, came first. It was the Empress archetypal mother, the Emperor archetypal father, the Magician as archetypal son, and the High Priestess as archetypal daughter. And as we continue in that particular archetype, we have the Hierophant as the archetype of the father in the role of lawgiver. Now, if we think of a Hierophant or a religious elder, priest, etc., that's someone who gives the law of God to man, which is very interesting. And also, if we're looking at this particular card, I've probably mentioned this in several of my videos. Each of the cards, this was my first tarot deck. So for a reference, I wrote out the keyword, the name of each card, and the zodiac association, or the, just the astrological association in general. So I hand wrote this, but on the actual deck of cards, they came without any labeling. And in hindsight, I kind of wish I hadn't labeled them. But getting back to my point, if we look at the Hierophant is associated with Taurus, the second sign of the zodiac, and the sign representing law giving, the physical world, orthodoxy, and that's kind of what the Hierophant tends to represent in any tarot deck. And so we have the archetypal father as lawgiver, which I think is very interesting. As we're observing this card, one thing you might notice right away if you're familiar with the Rider-Waite-Smith Coleman deck is that we don't have the two worshippers, the two supplicants at his feet, like we would in the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith Coleman deck. But the absence of the two supplicants, um, the two religious people praying at the feet of the Hierophant, we have the Hierophant, his palms up, and he's holding two very interesting figures. In his right hand, he's holding a man on fire. I think in this deck, that man represents original man, man kind of separate from God. And in the other hand, the Hierophant holds the world, and we see a little cross on top. And the Hierophant is the bridge between, man and God. And also, the Hierophant represents the law of God made manifest on earth. So we'll get back to our cutaway in just a moment. Um, Set a timer for 5 minutes, but actually, I guess I haven't set a timer yet. But this is just kind of a reference to the Rider-Waite-Smith Coleman Hierophant versus the Jungian deck Hierophant. Um, Feel free to pause that if you needed that as a reference. Um, I don't always I don't always refer to the Rider-Waite-Smith Coleman deck in comparison to the Jungian deck, but I thought it was interesting here. Now I've set a 5 minute timer. Actually, have we done the 5 minutes yet? We might have passed the 5 minutes, and we might be entering into, here we go, 15 minutes. I like to spend 15 minutes. And what I'll do after I've spent 5 minutes meditating on the card, I'll sit. You don't necessarily have to close your eyes, but this helps me when I'm meditating on the card. I'll close my eyes and, develop an inner landscape. I'm just kind of imagining the way that I would interact with the card if the card were made flesh and whatnot. And what would I be doing? How would I be interacting with the Hierophant? And at the time of my voiceover, I've had two meditations with this particular card. And I do try to meditate on each card twice a week. Usually I'll try and do that before I've made the final video, or sometimes I'll start on the video and by the time I've finished it, I've had my two meditations. But I'll close my eyes, I'll think about the images within the card, and I'll interact with either the Hierophant or with like the central image, the central archetypal figure in the card, or maybe something in the background. And on two separate occasions, my first occasion, interacting with the card, or my inner landscape with the card, just kind of in the presence of the Hierophant. Personally, I guess I found myself a little apprehensive, a little sort of feeling of, kind of a feeling of humility, perhaps even a feeling of shame if you're in front of somebody who's um, considered holy or somebody who is the go-between you and the divine. Um, in my interaction with this card, it made me feel really kind of small, or at the very least, really sort of subordinate. Um, so I interacted with the Hierophant in my first encounter with this card. In my second one, though, I felt like I interacted more with the man on fire. What does that mean when? How does the Hierophant help the original man transform from the original man into somebody who is in union with the divine. I've actually noticed that I'm talking really extemporaneously. I'm not referring to my notes at all. I do try and have some semblance of a script so that my thoughts aren't all over the place. I think the main thing, though, about these videos is I'd like this to be an opportunity for you to, get to know this particular deck, or maybe this these videos can be an inspiration for you if you have your own tarot decks. Maybe just give you kind of an idea on how to maybe get to know that particular deck. Um, the this specific deck, the Jungian deck, I think is a good tool for just kind of doing things like I guess just interacting with the cards and see how they affect you, how you interact with the Jungian archetypes of each card. If the Hierophant represents a law giving father, how would that make you feel? I guess maybe in relationship to your own father or to a father figure in your life as somebody who is a rules giver, somebody who sets a certain standard or a certain maybe religious observance that you're obligated to do while you're maybe under the roof, or maybe something that um, a lawgiver father figure imparts into your life that stays with you, maybe imparts a method for getting in touch with the divine. Maybe it's a religious practice or a meditative practice that maybe your father introduced you to, or maybe you were inspired by your own father or father figures own practices. When I think about the Hierophant, me personally, I actually sometimes think about my grandfather. My grandfather was an AME minister who was very devout. His faith meant a lot to him. His community was very important to him. His family was very important to him. And, he was somebody who was a lawgiver, of course, in his household. And, he set the standard. He was somebody that you didn't want to disappoint, somebody that you trusted, and somebody that you went to, um, for spiritual or for foundational guidance, I think. And I know not necessarily everybody has that particular type of father figure, or perhaps you do. Maybe this card will be a way of meditating on what that relationship meant to you, how that relationship made you feel, or if you didn't have that, how would you have, maybe if maybe what maybe oh, I'm losing my words here. Is this something that you would have liked to have had? Or maybe the Hierophant represents perhaps some hangups with authority. This card I think is very helpful in allowing you to relate to authority figures in general. Do you have a good relationship with authority figures? Do you have a challenging relationship with authority figures? What does authority represent to you in your life? And I think the Hierophant can be a good card to help you explore how that makes you feel. And I think I touched on a concept earlier, the concept of the demiurge, kind of a lesser creator deity, a lesser creator god. There's a whole lot of lore, a whole lot of mythology behind the demiurge. I would encourage you, if that's something you're interested in, um, certainly do some research on that. What I might do is provide a write up of my interactions with each of these cards. I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to do it yet. I might want to get through each of the cards first before, maybe I put something like that on my Substack if that's something you're interested in. And of course, I'm doing a lot of talking here, but if my talking is distracting as you're, taking in the card for your own just sort of deck study or for your own interest, please don't hesitate to mute me if need be. But yeah, this might be a good opportunity. Um, Maybe I'll quiet down a little bit and just kind of allow you to hone in on the card. Let's see. Maybe I will refer to my notes a little bit. Again, just kind of a reiteration of what the Hierophant tends to represent in a tarot deck. Um, this particular major arcana card, again, is a representative of the formal practices and the authority of organized religion or of laws in general. And, sometimes depending on your relationship with the law, maybe the laws are arbitrary or culturally determined, or the laws help you maybe the laws are representative of universal truth. Now, that's kind of a thing, I guess, that can be a little challenging as far as orthodoxy is concerned. Does the lawgiver provide laws that help you to get in touch with the divine, help you get in touch with your intuition, or help you get in touch with a higher power? Or, in your experience, do those laws seem to be an impediment toward spiritual enlightenment? I know people have different ideas. Religion or orthodoxy can represent different things in a person's life. I guess I'm just kind of throwing out sort of questions or things that you can maybe relate to as you're studying the Hierophant card. Let me know in the comments what the Hierophant might represent to you in your own study of certain decks, or this deck in particular. So there is an orthodoxy, um, you know, authority in organized religion or authority in any institutions. The Hierophant, writ large, can also represent just institutions in general, um, government in a lot of ways, anything that plays a role in um, any sort of governance in our life. Again, whether that's governmental, whether that's secular, even though I guess it's kind of, it might be kind of a stretch to see the Hierophant in secular terms. But I think historically, the Hierophant card can represent just any sort of law giving structure, religious or secular, which might be an interesting way to regard the card. The Hierophant, again, representing authority, government, decision making person. Um, and if you think about this particular card, if we look at, say, the face of the Hierophant here, I wish I could zoom in on his face, but that might be one way of relating to the card. Maybe just kind of homing in on the expression of the Hierophant. Is the Hierophant's face one of benevolence, kindness, mild manneredness? Or could there be that face might be a mask, maybe behind the sort of kindliness or the welcomingness of a priest or of a lawgiver or of religious orthodoxy itself? Maybe there's something a little more stringent behind that. Could the face be a mask of um, a sort of shadow side of the law giving body, a shadow side of what religion might represent, or a shadow side of what government might represent? Behind a mild mannered face, could this be the face of orthodoxy that's high handed or egotistical, or perhaps even sadist? Again, I guess as we look at the cards, we'll bring something of ourselves to our understanding of the cards sometimes. What the card represents, or what the archetype in the card represents in our own lives. That might be something worth exploring as you're dealing with the Hierophant card. What's one's relationship to authority, to government, to, again, religion? So I think those are very interesting questions, or interesting sorts of things to work through as we're observing the Hierophant. Now, if we're looking at the card itself, again, another difference between this Jungian deck's Hierophant versus the Rider-Waite-Smith-Coleman Hierophant is that this one is outdoors, um, in nature, blue, beautiful sky behind him. There aren't any supplicants at his feet, as in the Rider-Waite-Smith-Coleman deck. And we have a red sigil. Sometimes it's hard for me to work out what the sigils represent in these cards. The sigil, or a shield, at his feet. We have a red star with kind of a sun. It looks like a mandala, or sort of sunlight in the center of the card. So I hadn't quite resonated with what exactly that sigil is, but let me know what you might think in the comments. Maybe that's something, as you're looking at the card, maybe that's something that you're honing in on. And we have the Hierophant again holding the original man, the man on fire in one hand, and the globe, perhaps a representative of, um, perhaps representing orthodoxy given through the Hierophant and the effect that it has on the world. And there are the two torches by um, by his throne. Maybe those torches represent a certain enlightenment that the Hierophant holds. And yeah, you can take a few more moments to take in the card. I tend to give myself 15 minutes, no more than 20 minutes in meditation with the card. So at this point, we're probably getting close to the end of the meditation. There's probably a few more moments. So, yeah, this might be a good opportunity to, if you haven't formed an inner landscape yet, certainly take your time and do so. Um, Hopefully, my notification coming up hasn't been too much of a distraction. I really ought to mute that. Yeah, I thought this was a very fascinating card. So we can take a look here at our Hierophant. Just a few more moments. We've got another moment or so. I think we'll be coming out of the meditation pretty soon. Yep, I guess this is my timer coming off. It was actually a very immersive sort of experience that I was having there. So, yeah, it's the end of our timer. And at this point, as we come to the end of our meditation on the Hierophant there, what I like to do to take myself out of my meditative state, sometimes, I like to ground myself, maybe do a stretch, you know, sometimes I'll stand up, I'll shake, do a few neck rolls. It's easier, of course, for me, I guess, if I'm to sit as I'm doing the meditations. But if you're standing, maybe stamp your foot or whatnot to ground yourself. And yeah, that is our meditation on the Hierophant, week 5 of our deck study of the Jungian deck. And these are my supportive materials here: the Tarot Psychology and the Jungian Tarot and its archetypal imagery. And let me know in the comments what you think of this practice. And until next week, see you again.